Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the inaugural episode of The Scheme of Things with me, Zaki Khalid, your host. I am a strategic affairs analyst and commentator based in Rawalpindi. I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Talha Ibrahim.
Hello, everyone. This is Talha Ibrahim. I am the Director Academics at the Center for Strategic and Contemporary Research, Islamabad-based think tank. Uh, Thank you, Zaki, for encouraging me to be a part of this initiative, and I hope we can carry it forward in the long run.
Hopefully.
So,
I look forward
yes.
to that as well. So, Talha, before we come to some of the subjects we are going to highlight in this particular episode, and which is obviously the first episode, how's your week been? I had a discussion with you a few days ago, and you were in Lahore. What were you doing in Lahore? That's
So
my
I went there. Yes.
that's my
Okay. Aha, yes. Uh, I am a Karachiite. This is for the consumption of the audience that doesn't know that I belong from Karachi, but I'm settled in Islamabad since the last few years, and I've been working here. So I went to Lahore for a meeting um, with some. Okay. Uh, am I even allowed to talk about it?
We'll leave it at that, and I think the audience has a lot to deduce on that from that. So, well, you should have told me if you were in Lahore. I mean, the food over there is the best in Pakistan. I'm biased. You are a Karachiite. I can't argue with you because I know I have many friends in Karachi as well. But since I've moved to Rawalpindi about 5 6 years ago, the life over here, the environment, the food, I haven't really gotten adjusted to it. And it's not the. I've been looking for a place where you can get all those very spicy desi foods which can just zest you up. And I've still. The people of Rawalpindi and Islamabad have refused to accept my challenge, and those that have miserably failed. So I'm still open to anyone living up to the challenge and the standards expect. So yes, the interesting thing which the audience doesn't know is that it is actually Talha, my friend over here, who invited me to write for his institute in Islamabad. I had been writing and I continue to write for a variety of platforms, but I must say that Talha not only dragged me into CSCR and told me that, I appreciate your writings. I was going through a phase in which I was looking for more avenues in which disciplines which are not conventionally covered in Pakistan could be explored. And CSCR, I'm proud to say, and this is my show, so I'm not over here trying to say this out of influence, perhaps. But I must say that if you're looking for something which is unconventional as regards South Asia, and you specifically when we talk of cyberspace, whether it is the technical aspects or the informational aspects, I have met some brilliant people at CSCR, and I think that's what encouraged me to agree to what Talha said. And it has been an exhilarating experience for the past 1 year almost. I think my first year anniversary is also approaching. By the way, buddy, I'm looking forward to some sort of a bonus also in December 2020, if you know what I mean. So,
Got it.
yes, yes. So, you'll start with these very interesting things. I've been following some of the developments going on in the region, and if we talk from the geostrategic perspective, a lot has been going on internally and externally as well. But you know me, Talha, I don't look within. There are a lot many people talking about Pakistan's foreign policy, defense policy, economic policy, what politicians are doing this and that, and there are many people. There is a plethora of people who are maybe more learned and more experienced than you and I, who can talk on these subjects. And the purpose of this program, the audience, is that we want to discuss issues which are otherwise not highlighted in the mainstream media, including by the strategic community. So I came across these interesting developments As you all know, recently the Shanghai Cooperation Organization conference was held in Moscow, Russia, and Pakistan was also present over there. Its representatives, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Committee was there. We had a foreign minister over there, and India's defense minister Rajnath Singh was also there. There were some side meetings held with of each country with their allies and etc. And Mr. Rajnath met with the leaders, his counterparts, defense ministers from Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Tajikistan, and they discussed means of improving defense cooperation amongst themselves. And just to let you know that this is one aspect, this is like the defense prong which was taking place in Moscow, and concurrently there was another foreign policy prong led by Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar, the external affairs minister. He held a meeting with the Kazakh foreign minister and Kyrgyz foreign minister. So as you may have noticed, Kyrgyzstan is a country which is figuring both in the foreign policy and the defense prongs of India's outreach to the SCO. And this is very important because Kyrgyzstan is not only a country that has served as a base for many regional and extra regional powers, it is also a country with which India has maintained excellent cordial relations over the past decades, considerably more than Pakistan. And another interesting aspect is the fact that while there were routine statements about cooperation and this and that, at the same time, China's very vibrant foreign minister, Mr. Wang Yi, he held a meeting with his Kyrgyz president, and both countries reaffirmed their commitment to supporting issues of each other's core national interests. And you must know that when we are talking about China, then the word core actually suggests that it is directly concerning the supreme national security interests of China in particular. So it appears, what I've been able to deduce from reading various news and details emerging from these meetings, that Kyrgyzstan is particularly caught in the crosshairs between India trying to overpower or challenge China's unique outreach with this country. And when we talk about Uzbekistan, Pakistan has good relations with Uzbekistan as well. But what about Kazakhstan? Now, Kazakhstan, as we all know, is not only a source of uranium, but that's just one aspect which we like to look into. If you remember, in 2013, India had proposed, at that time it was the leadership of Indian National Congress. The foreign minister at the time, the external affairs minister, Salman Khurshid, he had proposed a 1500 kilometers long hydrocarbon pipeline on a north-south axis with Kazakhstan. And the intent behind that was to present a counter, an alternate to the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, the TAPI pipeline, which Pakistan is very adamant to fulfill. And you know, when we talk about Pakistan, one of our former army chiefs, General retired Ashfaq Parvez Kiani, when he was serving, he visited Kazakhstan and he discussed with the leadership over there that the TAPI pipeline is very essential for Pakistan's interests. So what we are seeing over here is that yes, you hear about the Indo-Pacific and ASEAN and engagements in the Pacific theater, but what we have missed is that India and China are drawing their attention more towards Central Asia, and which is very interesting because Pakistan right now, as I've been able to understand, is focusing on Africa and the Gulf. So this is what I found to be very interesting. So Kyrgyzstan over here, this is a country which Pakistan should be looking out into. Talha?
No doubt. The ingresses that are being made by the Indians in the Central Asia and now the Chinese, even the Chinese have been working on it since long. So the desire to exert the influence over car is of utmost importance for both the countries.
Absolutely.
So, so I'll initiate my part of this video session by commenting on the speech that was delivered by the Prime Minister Imran Khan yesterday at the UN General Assembly. So there were multiple. It was a commendable speech, and there were multiple themes that I've identified that pertains to Pakistan's external relations that factored that were a part of his commentary at the United Nations. So he chided the United Nations on how it has not been able to realize the promise it has made to the people of the world. Pakistan also, Prime Minister Imran Khan also talked about multilateralism, about Pakistan's support for multilateralism. And it is very important, especially given the context that we have seen India at times flouting the multilateral norms in various regional organizations. Although, since Jai Shankar has become foreign minister, he has repeated this multiple times that India will be focusing on multilateralism, but the conduct that we have been observing since the last uh, 2 3 years, it is very dismal, to say the least. So and another important thing is, as a person who has studied international relations, I could identify that Prime Minister Imran Khan invoked dependency theory when he was talking about how the developing countries don't have adequate fiscal space. He talked about debt relief. So he was trying to make this case about how the global north uh, and global south are interacting with one another in such a manner that the rich countries are getting richer and the poor countries are getting poorer. He talked about how the illicit finances are being laundered to rich countries by the corrupt elites. He talked about climate change. So, climate change is another issue which we have seen gaining prominence in the current dispensation. It is gradually gaining traction, and it is becoming a core part of our foreign policy narrative.
And Talha,
Imran Khan.
this is actually quite interesting because, um, forgive me for sounding ignorant, but I must be honest over here. I'm one of those people who have not been able to adequately understand how climate change dynamics actually can impact national security and the foreign policy perspective, which you mentioned. And I think it's very good that whoever drafted the speech of Prime Minister Imran Khan, he factored this also, because these are, as I was watching one of your earlier webinars during the COVID lockdown days, these are one of the non-traditional security threats which we must be adequately aware of.
Yes, yes. We can perhaps dedicate another segment to this topic about how climate change factors in the national security considerations. Apart from that, once again, on the basis of this Kashmir issue, Kashmir factored prominently in Prime Minister Imran Khan's speech, and that is why the Indian media is talking about how Imran Khan UNGA 2020 speech was almost a replica of 2019 litany. So Kashmir factored in his speech. He talked about how the Fourth Geneva Convention is being violated by India. Then he talked about Afghanistan.
Yes, altering the demographics of an occupied territory. That was a very
Yes,
interesting point.
yes. He talked about Palestine, dampening those notions that were being floated in media and
Oh, boy.
by certain commentators that Pakistan is probably, after these Arab states, Pakistan will be the country that would surprisingly uh, accept Israel as a legitimate state. So it dampened all those conspiratorial views that were coming in the media. And Imran Khan reiterated that it is a principal position of Pakistan, and it is a consistent position of Pakistan that we seek two-state solution in line with the international agreements that have been done in the past, and we seek this current Israel-Palestinian arrangement to revert back to the pre 1967 arrangement, and Al-Quds al-Sharif as the capital of United Contiguous Independent Palestinian State. At the same time, there are certain. Uh, I was glad to hear this from the Prime Minister of Pakistan that he concluded his speech by reposing his trust in the United Nations, and he talked about how the UN remains the best legitimate forum, and he talked about how it should be made fully responsive to deal with the world challenges. This coming at the time when countries like United States and even other regional powers, except for China, even India has at times berated the conduct of the United Nations, and they have talked about how they have talked in the tone that suggests that United Nations has become more of an impediment rather than a problem solver. Uh, the tone of Prime Minister Imran Khan was quite conciliatory in that aspect, and he talked about how it should be made fully responsive to
Yes.
deal with the world challenges. So it was a good speech.
Talha, it's interesting which you mentioned because I was one of those people who was gladly scrolling through Twitter and trying to look at these some people who are self-professed analysts and actually some very senior analysts of good integrity who were jumping to conclusions and assuming that since some particular Arab Gulf countries have decided to normalize relations with Israel, then that effect would automatically trickle down to Islamabad and it would be eventually forced to give a statement appreciating the same and following the approach of what some people were saying, this Sudan type approach of indicating some sort of signals of joining. And another more interesting aspect, Talha, is that you mentioned about reaffirming the belief on a two-state solution based on the pre-1967 arrangements. And did you notice that the Prime Minister made his speech, Kuwait was the other country which reaffirmed and amplified the same statement in support of Palestine instead of going with the rest of the Gulf Cooperation Council. So I found that very interesting as well. So Pakistan and Kuwait are on the same page when it comes to the issue of Palestine.
I missed that. Surprisingly, I'll go and look into it.
And that is what factors into this. And speaking of Israel, by the way, since we have come on this topic, I won't go into the details, but I think we both are aware, and a significant part of our viewers as well, that Bahrain, the UAE, and Israel signed a peace accord in Washington, D.C., that was brokered by President Donald Trump's administration. And Netanyahu signed agreements. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu signed agreements with the Emirati Foreign Minister Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan and Bahrain's Foreign Minister Abdul Latif Al Zayani. And the interesting thing is that although Sudan has still not joined the bandwagon, or the bandwagon effect has not actually materialized yet, Oman, interestingly, under its new leadership, has welcomed this development. And we are aware that the late Sultan of Oman, Sultan Qaboos, he was the first Arab ruler to actually open relations with Israel after Egypt and Jordan. So we know that Jordan and Egypt, based in the extreme end of West Asia and North Africa, were the countries which, since the 60s, were involved in direct wars with Israel. but Oman was the country which was even perhaps one of the first Arab countries which were not part of the traditional agreements, which welcomed this agreement. And the current ruler, the successor of late Sultan Qaboos, uh, he has expressed his resolve that he is going to uphold those policies. So we have Bahrain, UAE, Oman. These are three important GCC countries that have decided to normalize their relations with Israel. And the geostrategic significance of these developments is, by all means, you can go into a lot of depth, which I won't go into right now. But if you look at the location, we're talking about the Persian Gulf, we're talking about the Gulf of Aden, and these are some of the most important choke points of commercial trade which connect the Western Indian Ocean with the Mediterranean via the Red Sea. So you already have Egypt, which is the controlling authority in the Suez Canal, right? So you have the Red Sea, which is linking the trade with the Mediterranean. Egypt is part of the whole process. UAE has joined in. Oman has already declared its support, and some things which few people might have heard of. I was reading this very interesting intelligence brief by a private French intelligence firm known by the name of Indigo Publications. They have this website, intelligenceonline.com. It is a repository of very resourceful information, but you have to be sure that you are able to try to corroborate some of the very distinct sets of information mentioned over there. And they mentioned that Israel and the UAE both are actually trying to establish intelligence bases in Socotra, which is an island of Yemen. So if you go into those military dynamics, so we have the arc which is coming from Bahrain, UAE, Oman, Yemen, and then we have Egypt. So which country is left in between? You have Saudi Arabia, you have Sudan, and these are the places where the geostrategic competitor to these Arab countries, that is Turkey, is coming in. Now, the dilemma for Pakistan is that we have a big diaspora present in the Gulf, and a bulk of our foreign remittances from overseas Pakistanis comes from the Gulf region. And the fact that not only are the Gulf countries such as Saudi Arabia and the UAE excellent brotherly relations with Pakistan, but also Turkey. So if we don't even look at the economic angle, we are looking at a possibility in the future when Pakistan will have to suffer some sort of a squeeze between these competing powers in the region. And for the Arabs, obviously, I wrote this article for your institute a few weeks ago that, in my personal assessment, this arrangement is basically focused toward limiting perceived Turkish expansionism in the region. So all this, these certain effects. But then this merits the question, Talha. This merits the question, and I must add it over here for the sake of analytical neutrality, because I wouldn't just like to present my core assertion that Turkey is the target. Why Bahrain? Bahrain has nothing or no sort of a dispute with Turkey. Bahrain is not involved in any sort of extra regional regime changes as the UAE leadership has done in Libya and elsewhere, such as Yemen. So, why Bahrain? Bahrain's only issue in the region is Iran. So, now we know that since now Bahrain has actually joined the bandwagon, now we know that Iran is also one of the factors behind this arrangement. But we'll have to see to it. Everybody knows that Bahrain is the little boy who gets pushed around by his big brother Saudi Arabia and the UAE whenever it needs be, just for that extra vote bank in the GCC. So this is what I think. There are a lot of things to be followed over here from the foreign policy perspective, and as far as Pakistan's geostrategic interests are concerned, we have to tread very carefully. It's interesting we haven't really issued any statements. I don't know why. Have you come across any statement by the Foreign Office commenting on any of these developments?
that our foreign office is mum on these developments. We haven't come up we haven't either opposed them or spoke in favor of these developments, because I think at this point of time these developments do not directly concern us, and it would cause unnecessary controversies and direct unnecessary attention on Pakistan. It is better that we focus on our we have this is the time that we should be focusing on Afghanistan. We should be focusing on our eastern border at India. We should be focusing on how to make China Pakistan economic corridor uh, functional, rather than unnecessary speaking about Middle Eastern politics. But the Prime Minister of Pakistan has already given a policy statement yesterday at the UN forum.
Yes.
Uh, that speaks for itself where Pakistan stands on this issue.
And speaking of Pakistan's stance on this issue, yes, indeed, the Prime Minister of Pakistan made it categorically clear about where we stand on the issue of Palestine. But Talha, isn't it beyond just Palestine also? Because fine, we have that issue as well, but when we look at Arab relations with countries in the Middle East and North Africa, we are also looking into two of the most important seas which connect global trade, the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. So we are talking about cargoes coming from the Atlantic and they're joined to the Pacific via the Indian Ocean. And when we are trying to understand how the coming 5 or 10 years will uh, evolve into a framework where you could have a gang of Arab countries that are trying to control these waterways in and much to the chagrin of countries such as Turkey or maybe even China, because if we talk about China, Turkey is an important outlet to the Mediterranean and towards Europe for China in the larger Belt and Road Initiative, which you very rightly mentioned. And for that, China is also aware that it needs to build good relations with Arab Gulf countries, particularly Saudi Arabia. So, do you think that, in your view, if you're talking, I mean, just from your individual perspective, do you think that China would like to get involved to the extent that economic interests or maritime trade in these waterways are not impacted due to these scuttles between the Arabs and Israelis on the one end and Turkey on the other? Or do you think that that is something which is a dynamic which is too unpredictable to be assessed at this point in time?
I would go with the second option
Okay.
that you have just mentioned. The dynamic is too unpredictable, and it is not in uh, China's hands. Uh, I think time time will be a much better. Sorry, let me repeat again. So I would go with the notion that the situation is too dynamic, too unpredictable, and I'm not. I don't feel that I'm qualified to comment on this right now. But I think we'll get to know about it in a much better manner with the passage of time.
Speaking of waterways and the ocean, I believe you have something on the Indo-Pacific to share.
Okay, okay. So yes, this is another topic that I wanted to bring up in our conversation. Germany recently issued an Indo-Pacific strategy, and by issuing this strategy, and surprisingly, this happened at the time when the Chinese foreign minister Wang Yi had just wrapped up his European tour, and he had just completed the Berlin leg of the tour. He
Exactly.
was trying to repair damaged ties, and he went there to talk about after post coronavirus pandemic. He was out to gauge a pulse of the European states. So the day after he left, Germany issued this new Indo-Pacific strategy, and it suggests that Germany has recalibrated its approach towards China. This strategy talks about goes to the extent that that it talks about the enforcement measures that Germany is going to take. It
Yep.
uses the terminology of enforcement, so I think it's very assertive in that sense, uh, because it's very assertive in that sense, and it is a very surprising change of tone. Uh, ear- Earlier, Germany relationship with China was more about economics and trade, but it seems that it would now include uh, geopolitical interests. It would now include human rights and other matters as well. And this strategy, France was the first European country to issue this to issue Indo-Pacific strategy in 2019. It was before that it was the United States that adopted an Indo-Pacific strategy in 2017. Now we have Germany joining these other countries, other European, joining US and France. So the approach towards Indo-Pacific is being reassessed.
I think, yes, you absolutely rightly mentioned about this Indo-Pacific approach of European countries. And the line which you've mentioned, I think that makes for a very catchy article headline in itself. Germany's recalibrations of relations with China. And keep in the fact that within Germany, the internal politics, the German parliament has been debating about extending its troop deployment in Afghanistan, and that's been a very hotly contested issue with the opposition fiercely trying to uh, bring down any and all efforts to further extend German troop presence in Afghanistan. And now it seems that with the issuance of this strategy, the Germans might be thinking that, hey, we've wasted a considerable amount of our time in the Middle East and embroiled itself in Afghanistan, and we've suffered so many casualties. We've become involved in a mess. We've tried to appoint a special envoy and bring the Taliban and the government to a negotiating table. Now it seems like they're trying to move out from the Middle East and focus exclusively on South, East, and East Asia. And it would appear that when they also believe, this is very true that the fact that Germany, apart from France, is also a European power which believes in the unification of the Pacific and Indian Oceans. So they're actually supporting the original vision of former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who was the brains behind Indo-Pacific, and obviously this camp includes the US and these Quad countries, India, Australia, and you have all these people at the same table. So it would appear that if you have even two European powerhouses and not necessarily the UK, because the UK has been conspicuously silent toward the Indo-Pacific as of yet. It still maintains its own distinct approach to the region because it is mindful of the fact that countries which are former members of the Commonwealth, including island countries, they might not have the same um, common understanding toward the region as France and Germany might have. So it would remain to be seen. But France and then now Germany. And Germany, interestingly, as you mentioned in their paper, the Indo Pacific paper, I happen to have read that document. One of the most important things which I read was, for me personally, the most important takeaway that Germany intends to establish a center in Singapore. Now, Singapore is a very important anchor state in the Western Pacific, and that whole belt south of the Malacca Strait. And Singapore is also the base where American operations and intelligence initiatives in the Asia Pacific region, from where they take place. And the fact that Germany's continued emphasis in the document was to fight disinformation about developments in the region. I don't understand why disinformation is so important when it comes to the Indo-Pacific. Who is actually, where is the disinformation coming from? And that's when you realize that they're actually referring to China. This is my understanding. This is not something I'm throwing out there without trying to interpret it thoroughly. The disinformation, which I personally believe, is that they're talking about China's own national understanding about their what they claim is a legitimate presence in the South China Sea and the development of islands and exclusive economic zones in the region. So, how does that impact Talha? This is a question to you because I've been meaning to ask you this. Uh, you see, China intends to export, its ultimate objective behind BRI is to develop Europe as a market where it can throw its products. So, with Germany and France coming to the US camp and the Japanese camp, how is the geo-economic initiative of China going to be fulfilled? They're going to have to make a lot of amends.
They'll have to make a lot of amends, that's for sure. And the geopolitical, but you are talking in terms of the geopolitical considerations that are the relationship that China has with other ASEAN countries,
But
and they are talking.
may I add, sorry to cut you off, may I add that you mentioned about Chinese Foreign Minister and State Councillor Wang Yi's tour to Europe. The timing was very interesting. I mean, was that it doesn't seem that the objectives behind the tour resulted in some sort of restraint that okay, we can issue this policy later, we'll think about it. They went ahead and they passed that Indo-Pacific strategy. What would you say on that?
There is one interesting article in the South China Morning Post in which they have talked about the China was aware of this possible change in German policy. Uh,
I'm not aware
never the,
of that
yes,
thing.
yes, South China Morning Post, there is an article in which they have mentioned, there is this line, which I can recall, that there were indications that Beijing was aware of the change in
Hmm.
possible change in German policy, but that didn't stop Beijing, that didn't stop Wang Yi from going ahead and doing his tour of European countries, including Germany. And but I think that the political considerations, the geopolitical considerations, should they have an impact on the economic considerations. But in this case, in this scenario, I think it will be. I don't want to go ahead and say that the geopolitical considerations would trump the economic relations between both the countries. So there is this awareness on both sides, and still the activities are taking place, the trade is taking place. In fact, the same article, the South China Morning Post article, in which this I've read this. Uh, there they have attributed a statement to Wu Can, China's ambassador to Germany, who have said that China-Germany relationship had gone beyond bilateral ties to strategic influence, and they have talked about how Beijing is ready to intensify strategic cooperation with Germany, and both sides should resume dialogue at all levels to strengthen mutual political trust. So. I think there is a playing field on which both sides are interacting with each other, engaging with each other. Uh, and there is this German strategy to Indo-Pacific is more of a bandwagon thing. Uh, I don't know. I have to read it more comprehensively, but I've read somewhere that even this strategy, German Indo-Pacific strategy, is more of a uh, disparate sort of development that won't won't affect the realities on ground in a uh, major way.
So basically, this is interesting. So basically, you are also of the personal belief, and I might have that same belief, that this could be just a cosmetic arrangement, just something to put it out there to maybe pacify America and its allies who have been wanting.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. This is also one of the reason that is being floated around, that perhaps uh, because Merkel was giving a tough time to President Trump, so this is perhaps one of the attempt to uh, gain currency and get in the good books of US once again, because Germany was like the most vocal. Uh, as a European country, Germany was most vocal about what the United States was doing wrong.
Absolutely. So, we've talked about the Indo-Pacific, and the Indo part of the Pacific is always something which interests me, and Talha, would gladly agree that I do have to the concept of
Yes.
Pacific. I have long maintained that the Indian Ocean can never be uh, pacified. The pacification of the Indian Ocean, that is a ridiculous concept because it actually contradicts New Delhi's own core assertion that the Sagar Initiative, Security and Growth for All in the Region, the Sagarmala project, in which India is trying to establish a cultural bond between countries of the Indian Ocean according to shared cultural heritage and all of that mumbo jumbo, which the External Affairs Ministry loves to throw out. And the fact of the matter is that the culture of Indian Ocean countries, East Africa, island states, India, the Arab Gulf countries is so unique. It is so different and distinct from those in the Pacific countries that it just very clearly tells you how strategically confused India is when it comes to trying to establish its own net security provider status in the Indian Ocean, but then it says, okay, the Pacific is also part of it. So you either have to discard the whole Indian Ocean thing together, or you have to look at it through a collective lens. Speaking of which, Tala, let me tell you, I came across some things which I have been adding together for a while over the past 2 weeks. I wanted to actually combine it into the form of an article for your institute, but I decided that it would become such a mishmash that it would be better if we include it in our discussion over here in this show. I'll take you to this recent development in which an Indian Navy warship, the INS Talwar, undertook refueling with a US Navy replenishment tanker, the Yukon, in North Arabian Sea. Obviously, North Arabian Sea, according to the maritime doctrine of Pakistan, is its primary area of interest. So we have an Indian Navy warship being refueled by a US Navy tanker in an area of Pakistan's primary security concern. And this took place just this month in September under the Logistics Exchange Memorandum of Agreement, the LIMOA, as I abbreviate it. So, what is the Yukon exactly? In the Indian media has been a buzz. They've been trying to present it as, there is Indo-US naval cooperation in the North Arabian Sea and blah blah blah. But actually, the fact of the matter is that the Yukon is not part of any battleship command, but rather it is part of a logistics, military sea lift and airlift command, which is actually just intended to replenish and refuel ships littered across the different combatant areas of responsibilities. So Yukon has been part this particular replenishment tanker which refueled the Indian warship. It is currently, as of June 2020, it is deployed to the Fifth Fleet area of operations, which falls under U.S. Navy Central Command, the NAVCENT, which is headquartered in Bahrain. Now, this is one aspect. So you keep this in mind that in September 2020, we have for the first time a Central Command ship of the US replenishing an Indian warship. Now, it is interesting from the angle because India and the US do not have an interoperable relationship in the Central Command. It is exclusively limited within the Indo-Pacific Command.
Within the Indo-Pacific. Yes,
So
yes.
this is a prime example that in 2020 the US has officially initiated the pacification of Indian Ocean by trying to include a component gradually of Indian Navy in the Central Command AOR. And Central Command is one which is exclusively focused towards the Middle East, Iran, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and these Arab Gulf countries. So this is actually also a message, and we saw reports since the past year or so that India has been trying to uh, appoint a naval liaison officer in NAVCENT, Bahrain, unprecedented. Which begs the question: what about Pakistan? Why is Pakistan silent on the fact that while India gets to be included in the Central Command area of operations, why doesn't Pakistan look toward the Indo-Pacific Command and make a sort of tit for tat arrangement so it has visibility of what is going on? And okay, and now this is one aspect, the refueling of the Indian Navy tankers. So if we go a few months before this, and I love making timelines, in June 2020 the US Navy Patrol Squadron VP-16, they assumed responsibility of Commander Task Group 57.2, which is also known as the Al Udeid Air Group. It is part of Task Force 57 in the 5th Fleet AOR. What is Al Udeid? Al Udeid is that famous air base in near Doha, Qatar. So VP-16, a naval intelligence and reconnaissance squadron based in Qatar, it came from the Pacific. And I'll tell you why this is very important. And this is something which I believe is going to be the highlight of this inaugural episode of ours. So VP-16 comes to Central Command. And why is Task Force 57 important? Because the VP-16 squadron includes P-8 Poseidon, these Boeing aircraft which carry out naval intelligence collection and signals collection in their area of operations. And it is currently part of Task Force Sentinel, which is responsible for stability in the Middle East. And we all know the Fifth Fleet area of operations, NAVCENT includes Arabian Gulf, the Persian Gulf, Gulf of Oman, Red Sea, parts of the Indian Ocean. But interestingly, VP-16 is now in Central Command, Fifth Fleet. But concurrently, components of it are also supporting Task Group 67.1 in the Sixth Fleet area of operations, which comes under US Naval Forces Europe in the Mediterranean Sea. So you have an arrangement over here that Naval Intelligence Squadron of the US, it is present in Central Command, and some of its elements are present in the Mediterranean. So we talked earlier about, if you're building an ark and you have a US component, Mediterranean, you have the Indian Ocean, and you have all this encirclement going on, and a complete interconnectedness of the US Navy in from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean. And you might think that I'm only referring and talking about the US over here. Well, actually not. The interesting thing is that why is VP-16 of particular importance that I considered it important to include in this episode? Well, for a matter of fact, back in October 2018, so we are talking around 2 years ago, this very particular squadron, VP-16, was part of the 4th and 7th Fleet area of responsibilities, which means Fourth Fleet is in this was in the southern Atlantic, Latin America, etc., etc. Seventh Fleet, as we know, is part of the Pacific under Indo-Pacific Command. So they were in the South Atlantic, Pacific, and now VP-16 gradually came to Indian Ocean and Mediterranean Sea. In October 2018, VP-16 held a meeting with Indian Navy officers at the Indian Naval Air Station 312. It is one of their which houses one of their squadrons at Indian Naval Station Rajali in Tamil Nadu. And why did they meet? Why did they hold a meeting over there? Because by that time, India had already purchased and deployed maritime patrol aircraft and intelligence aircraft of the Poseidon, P-8 Poseidons, Neptunes, customized versions for enhanced intelligence collection in the region. And in 2018, what the US did, personnel from VP-16, they held meetings with Indian Naval Air Station 312 to discuss advanced maritime domain awareness. And what they did was they actually held cordial meetings between subject matter experts, and they discussed about how they are going to further promote interoperability and get better visibility into the Western Indian Ocean region, which I don't no need to go into the details. I've already discussed in writing for CSCR many a times. And just for some viewers who may not be familiar with the particulars of the P-8 Poseidon aircraft, they are intended exclusively to be for maritime intelligence. So you can expect flying over islands and the waters and all of that, the blue expanse. But earlier this year, Chief of Defence Staff, India's Chief of Defence Staff, General Bipin Rawat, he disclosed to the press that India had actually used Poseidons for intelligence and reconnaissance, not only on China in the Doklam crisis, which is still underway, but also after Pulwama, which happened last year, for intelligence collection on Pakistan. So if you see where I'm going with this, and I'm just going to leave it at that without going into further details, you have aircrafts and squadrons which the Indian and American naval intelligence squadrons have interoperability in the Western Indian Ocean. Those same aircraft are used for intelligence collection on Pakistan and China, and concurrently now those same aircraft are being used against certain Middle Eastern targets such as Iran and also in the Mediterranean, perhaps against Turkey, but that would be a far-fetched assertion. So this is very, very interesting. So we missed the point that you are having elements of the US Navy from the Pacific being brought into Central Command, and you can have this fantastic fusion of naval intelligence between the Indian and US navies in the region. And you add to that mix favorable conditions with certain Arab Gulf countries, normalizing relations with Israel, and you have voila, that is what you have for the US Navy in the region. And this is something which I believe China needs to be very mindful of. And we can expect some sort of maritime posturing by China, as it usually does once or twice per year. It sends its nuclear submarines into the Indian Ocean, and the Indians are going all bonkers over it. So
Okay.
yeah,
I would add to what you have said. You talked about the North Arabian Sea. You must be very well aware of that India, Japan have started their non-contact naval drills, a 3-day exercise in the North Arabian Sea.
yes, the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy.
The manifestation of that, the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy in in the Western Indian Ocean, and more specifically in the North Arabian Sea. Wow. So,
And the fact of the
so
remains that Japan already has its naval logistics base in Djibouti in East Africa. So you can see where this is all going. So if, let me ask you, Talha, you make an arrangement, you and I make an arrangement that I scratch your back, you scratch mine. You can get replenished by my ships, but I can also get replenished by your ships.
Yes, yes, uh, yes.
So
It's shared.
don't we know that India has replenishment facilities in Oman, in the Duqm port, etc.? Couldn't they be possibly used by the US Navy in the future?
It's
I mean,
fairly.
there are many examples. You can see where we could go with this, but the point remains that this is something which we'll need to factor into. That the key word over here, the crux of the whole discussion is maritime reconnaissance and naval intelligence. This is the main takeaway from what is happening in the Western Indian Ocean. And this has obviously got nothing to do with political agreements between Arab leaders, etc., etc. This is pure militarization of the Western Indian Ocean. And I would request some of the viewers who might be wondering who the heck I am. I would encourage you to visit this my perspective paper on the CSCR website. I wrote about how the militarization of Western Indian Ocean by the US and India can compel certain regional states to carry out a nuclear buildup in the high seas, something which is absolutely undesirable, and it goes against various United Nations conventions as well. So,
So, okay, okay. So, I would like to add one thing here. For the viewers, Zaki has an unparalleled grasp on multiple subjects, and most importantly, Zaki can comment with authority on maritime security issues. So I would encourage you all to go and read Zaki's paper. I have made this case at different places that whatever work there is on CSCR's website, if you are interested in learning more about what's happening in the maritime domain, you need to read Zaki's papers. He has always come up with some fresh perspectives, some very lucid insights that are quite that even the most seasoned commentators, even the most seasoned watchers of the Indian Ocean region, in fact, Indo-Pacific, and now he's talking about the Central Command, he's bringing Mediterranean as well. So even the most seasoned maritime domain experts uh, cannot comment on things with such authority and would have such grasp that he displays in his writing.
Talha,
So Zaki, I would.
I don't know if you can see me blushing, but I think I'm too dark for you to be able to see me blushing. Thanks a lot.
So, you're welcome. So there is one question that I would like to ask from you, particularly because we are talking about the naval component, about the maritime security architectures. So, do you think that that a strategy of distant maritime power projection can work for India? Particularly if you see in the context of what's happening at Ladakh, it has prompted some think tankers and some former establishment people in Delhi to come up with this proposition that we need to offset China militarily in Indian Ocean. Although I understand, even we can debate on it, how feasible is this kind of, how feasible is this arrangement of setting China militarily in Indian Ocean, but such opinion is not unwarranted if you see, because Delhi has, due to its irresponsible, not only irresponsible but also irredentist claims and even political actions in Kashmir and Ladakh has resulted in a recalibration of China's approach towards the line of actual control. So China now effectively controls around 1,000 square kilometers of territory, depths and plains area around Pangong, so which India claims that it is on the western side of line of actual control. So this is prompting some people in Delhi to come up with this ideas that Delhi needs to offset China militarily in the maritime domain. So what do you think about this? Uh, I would like to hear you on this.
Well, uh, out of intellectual humility, I would repeat what you mentioned on a particular topic a while ago, that some of the aspects of it are too unpredictable to be assessed at this point in time. But what I can, some of the very minute aspects which I can maybe try to get a grasp on, is that let's, for a hypothetical scenario, and I love engaging in hypothetical scenarios. Let's assume that India goes ahead and it green signals its intent to offset China militarily in the Indian Ocean, as you said they have preferred. Obviously, for that to materialize, India would not risk a unilateral action, but it would try to seek a consensus from forums such as the Indian Ocean Rim Association, the IORA, which is not only a declared and accredited part of materializing the Indo-Pacific concept according to the US Department of Defense and State Department, but also the fact that UAE is presently chairing IORA. And when we talk about India trying to make its way specifically against China in the Indian Ocean, the Arab countries have their own trade and foreign policy dynamics with the Chinese. And when it comes to big money, countries such as the UAE and Saudi Arabia are not going to let anyone shy Beijing away from making investments and feeling safe and secure in the region. And I think this is one of the reasons why it's publicly acknowledged that Pakistan does have an important role to play in trying to further cement relations between Beijing and the GCC. And when we talk about that, there is also another factor which is very important, and that is island countries. Now, we all know recently countries such as Maldives, India is extensively involved over there in disaster relief operations. Why? And even the oil spill near Mauritius. And why is India involved in these posturing? Because it wants to assure these countries that whenever you are in trouble, we are there for you. We are here to act as a shield. And in exchange for that, they do expect that the diplomatic baggage they will gain will help them to assert some sort of initiatives which may not be desirable for China in the future. But obviously, that would be very limited thinking. So, as far as maneuvering against China in the Indian Ocean is concerned, let me again use the terminology of geography because that's where geostrategy comes in. I don't think that's possible in the Western Indian Ocean for now because of the Arab and East African dynamic involved. But I do see that happening in the Eastern Indian Ocean to a certain extent because that is where you have the Bay of Bengal and you have the Andaman Islands, Andaman and Nicobar Islands. You have exercises taking place, a passage exercise taking place recently. And the Indian Navy is much more potent in the Eastern Indian Ocean as compared to the West. But this merits the question, is India going to, or does it intend to offset China, the Eastern Indian Ocean or the Western Indian Ocean? Now, this is quite a difficult answer to give because if you're talking about directly hitting China's interest, then yes, the Eastern Indian Ocean, the Strait of Malacca, the choke point, and all of that usual talk, that is going to hit China. But at what cost? You see, India I was going to mention this in this session also. The Indian Foreign Minister Jaishankar recently held discussions with leaders of ASEAN. India wants to develop a further 5-year plan of cooperation with ASEAN countries. So it's going to be very risky to try to stomp over ASEAN leaders and go all out against China because they'll obviously be going back. The member countries of the ASEAN, they're known to be severely against regional aggression and alliance formations. And then, obviously, in the Western Indian Ocean, you have another Chinese interest which will hit China, where it hurts the most, and that is the CPEC project in Gwadar. But I ask you now, it is a counter question. Has the Indian strategic community made it clear that the to offset China militarily, are they actually talking about the Eastern theater or the Western theater? I don't particularly have an answer to that, and until we're actually sure on which trajectory they're hinting at, it would be quite difficult to make an assessment.
Okay, so uh, because this east-west peripheries, there are two different
Total.
uh, there are two different ways of looking at the eastern aspect and the western aspect, as you have mentioned. So there have been certain things that the certain developments that have come up in the media, and there have been uh, good commentaries on these developments online as well. But some people have talked about that to deter China, India needs to make a sea denial complex in the Andaman Islands, because Andaman are in the on the eastern side, and likewise they have proposed that not proposed, but okay, I've read this development, a very recent development. India is planning to make planning the seed denial complex thing in the Lakshadweep, that is on the western periphery, uh, the Arabian the Western Indian Ocean and
Yeah.
North Arabian Seaside. Not the Arabian Seaside. In fact,
Well,
more to the south, but Arabian Sea. So they have been thinking about developing the sea denial complex to deter China there. Uh, Andaman and Nicobar is a strategic outpost to monitor China's naval activity in the Eastern Indian Ocean, and they are developing this integrated surveillance network, strengthening the anti-access capabilities in the Andamans. And the analysts believe that it.
I mentioned this in that profile I made of Lieutenant General Manoj Pandey for
Yes, you did.
about how why he was brought in to improve and fast track military infrastructure in Andaman and Nicobar.
Yes. So they are saying that it would help protect India's tactical leverage in the regional seas. But sea denial assets could be of little values because China's naval deployments are mostly outside India's territorial waters.
Yes.
So it doesn't directly concern China. China won't feel any sort of threat by these sea denial capabilities near the Andaman. Acha, another thing, why the sea denial strategy is unlikely to work on the western side, the Pakistan-China nexus, because as of now, uh, even if this is a challenge, it doesn't yet involve a physical threat to Indian assets. Uh, the Chinese Navy, not to my knowledge, it is clearly. I haven't come across any such development in which I have read that there is any entanglement of sorts in the Arabian Seas. Um, Although China has expanded its engagement with the Pakistan Navy, it has participated in a number of bilateral and multilateral exercises of the Makran coast. But there is no there is I think that the threat perception has not morphed up to that level that India needs to implement a sea denial strategy, a robust sea denial strategy on the western side. And sea denial strategy is also not feasible because it is generally frowned upon. The seas are it is the seas are widely considered to be part of global commons. Making sea denial complexes, you are in some way or another, you are securitizing the waters unnecessarily. So it doesn't give a good impression. So, uh, other than sea denial architectures, the analysts are coming up with proposals of distant power projections. They are talking about how Indian Navy can keep a sustained presence in the Western Pacific. That is the space that Beijing dominates.
And
And
that is important because if we just look at that focus, you mentioned about these various tactics and procedures through which the Indian Navy can try to engage in sea denial and try to or completely try to subvert Chinese freedom of naval operations in the region. And I think we have to bring General Bipin Rawat, the Chief of Defense Staff statement many months ago, in which he said that you see, India has yet to theaterize its military commands and integrate them. And he mentioned that he it was actually quite awkward. The term he used, a peninsular command near Kerala and on the Goa side. So he was actually talking about integrating the western and eastern seaboards, which many retired Indian Navy veterans also were saying that this guy has completely lost his mind. He doesn't know what he's talking about, and you're limiting the Indian posturing to a peninsular approach. But you see, the problem is India enjoys and it has that freedom and flexibility to flex its muscles in the Western Indian Ocean because how many challenges are there? Challengers are there? It only limits itself just before East Africa and just in the Southern Indian Ocean, and it is very mindful about Arab and U.S. naval central presence in the North Arabian Sea. So whatever it does over there cannot be without Washington's approval. There is no sensitive choke point, and it can never ever risk trying to disrupt any sort of stability in the Red Sea. So it doesn't go there. But now in the Eastern Indian Ocean, as you mentioned, near Andaman, the Strait of Malacca, you have an aggressive US Navy, you have Japanese patronage, and under their shadows, it is very easy for New Delhi to say, okay, for example, you're going to conduct so called freedom of navigation operations, FONOPs, in the area which is actually meant to just poke at China. So we'll send one or two ships as well. I think that's the only extent they'll ever go to, unless and until the infrastructure for intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and forward posting in Andaman is complete. You mentioned about Lakshadweep in the Western Indian Ocean. Do you already know that Indian Navy has two forward operating bases over there?
yes, yes.
But yet, despite having those bases for many years, have you ever seen regional countries such as Pakistan and anyone else trying to factor that into their threat calculus? No, because we haven't witnessed that sort of assertive posturing or aggressiveness as we do recently under the patronage of US and Japan. So I think that these talks about offsetting China militarily, this is absolutely impossible for India to pursue unilaterally, except and until if it has some sort of an alliance with functional alliance with Japan. Australia has clearly said that they are not going to engage in any sort of military signaling except diplomatic and politically. So they are out. You have Japan, the new prime minister is in. He wants to develop relations. My profile for Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga will be out for CSCR soon, inshallah. And he wants to improve relations with China. So that leaves just the US. And obviously, to the US also, to what extent? Escalation dynamics, to what extent will the US try to risk Beijing's ire? That remains to be seen.
Yes, coming to the reference of Bipin Rawat, he talked about his vision to make sort of some sort of peninsular arrangement and integrating the eastern and western. Okay, so jokes aside. The humor is quite evident uh, when we talk about Bipin Rawat. So, see, he was talking about the Peninsular Command. But I'm talking about a much more toned down version. Uh, some people believe that India needs to develop the people who are more pragmatic. Who are more pragmatic, they are saying that India need to increase the naval operations east of the Malacca, and they should develop. India should develop a rapid crisis service expeditionary capability. Even that, I believe, it's a far-fetched kind of notion, expeditionary capability in the Indian Ocean region. Let alone a bigger claim that we should make a peninsular command. So. There is this dearth of realization that China has marshaled the resources, technology, and political will over the past 2 decades to strengthen and modernize the rise of PLA in nearly every aspect. Quote unquote, these are the words: China has marshaled the resources, technology, and political will over the past 2 decades to strengthen and modernize the PLA in nearly every aspect. These are the words of the Pentagon annual China military power report that was released recently. There is this dart of realization in Delhi that they have not been able to they have not been able to follow up on the doctrine that they developed to proactive what was it, proactive offense doctrine, cold start.
Yes.
So they have not been able to operationalize that. It's been more than a decade.
Which had a naval version as well.
This is a naval version as well.
And Talha,
So
that's actually, sorry, let me add please over here just now, because that is a fantastic point you've made. You see, that's a doctrinal contradiction. If you've noticed the Indian Navy doctrines that came in 2007 onward, 2009, the in which India formally announced itself as the net security provider, blah blah blah, and they already confined themselves to the Indian Ocean, but now they have actually been thrown into the concept that look, Indian Ocean is just one part. There is also the Pacific. They haven't they haven't been uh, able to actually get a proper grasp of the huge scope involved as far as the conduct of military operations, because when a war planner sitting in the naval headquarters of India, when he's looking at the Indo-Pacific, he has to take into account the region spanning from Red Sea to, for example, you can talk about the easternmost shores of Japan, or the Philippines. So they don't have the assets. And talking of Rawat, he said, "Okay, we don't need an aircraft carrier also. So how do you expect them to go into expeditionary mode also?" Okay, so
yes,
there are so many things they are doctrinally confused, and the only thing they're very assertive
absolutely.
about and very certain about also, to a ridiculous and delusional extent, is their political, bandwagoning around Washington and Tokyo. So again, I think that's a very good point.
Yes, precisely. They have been jumping the boats for so long. It's been happening since the last at least since the last 2 decades. This has been happening. This is a continuous thing. They don't get the hang of thing, and they go to another level, and then they go to another level. This is very important. And there is this. They don't realize it, but there is this lack of political will. They are not. They don't there is no unanimity as far as their defense establishment is concerned. They are confused about how to deal with China, and some are favoring diplomatic options. Others are saying that we should counter them in Himalaya. Some are saying that we should go and counter them in Indian Ocean. So we can schedule this topic for some other time. But there is this interesting paper that was recently published by Carnegie. Uh, the author was Arzan Tarapur, and he's talked about India's military offensive capabilities, and he has criticized it. Was It's quite a critique of how as far as the Indian military strategy is concerned. So that gives you a glimpse of of what how of the disparity between the reality and the claims that are being made by the policymakers in Delhi.
Absolutely. And I think with that, we have reached the conclusion of our inaugural session. Talha, it's been quite a roller coaster. I wasn't aware of how this would progress over time, but I think this has been quite an interesting wrap up of what we consider at our individual and personal levels to be some of the important geostrategic developments in the region. So, from Talha and myself, I'd like to thank the audience for tuning in. And we can't promise this to be, we can't define a periodic session for this, but we are hoping to turn this into a fortnightly series, and we hope for that. I'm not going to ask you to click on any particular buttons. That's not me. So if you're in any sort of updates, just log into that URL you have. If you're not, well, then it doesn't really matter. So we like to discuss these issues, and Talha, it was wonderful to listen from you, your perspective, and I think this needs to be encouraged more and more. And we needed this, and we someone has to look into these uh, less highlighted aspects of foreign policy, defense, and economics, which and the political aspect, which are not really covered in the mainstream media. Thanks, Talha, for your time, and thank you to the audience in particular for tuning in. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum and Allah Hafiz from me.
Allah Hafiz, Allah Hafiz, everyone. Allah Hafiz.